Imogen Green holds a theology degree from University of Birmingham, where she focused on Latter-day Saint theology and material religion. She writes the Liminally Mormon, exploring Mormonism through the blend. I did pre-read this, I promise, and I'm like, can't read. I am literate, American but literate. I'm going to start over. Imogen Green holds a theology degree from the University of Birmingham, where she focused on Latter-day Saint theology and material religion. She writes the Liminally Mormon, exploring Mormonism through a blend of academic insight and lived experience. Having once come close to conversion, Imogen spent 6 months fully immersed in LDS life before stepping away, an experience that continues to inform her research and writing. Her work blends British and transatlantic Mormon histories with a focus on gender, visual culture, and resistance. One more round of applause, please.
Yeah, thank you. For full disclosure, I am going to be reading from a script. I find it really hard to present and remember things, so forgive me if I'm not looking up enough. But yeah, I'm going to look at art as resistance, and particularly in relation to women in the LDS tradition. So just to give an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'll give you an introduction quickly, and then we're going to look at 19th century anti-Mormon caricatures, official LDS artwork, modesty and erasure in LDS art, Minerva Teichert's feminist currents, the 1961 British Singing Mothers Tour. I've left something out here, which is going to look at the stained glass exhibition that was in Hyde Park the other year, Heavenly Mother and contemporary feminist interventions, and then a bit of a roundup conclusion, and we'll hopefully have some discussion and questions. So, throughout the history of Latter-day Saint tradition, art has not merely illustrated doctrine or adorned sacred spaces. It has acted as a powerful form of resistance and negotiation. In moments of crisis, change, or silence, both visual and performing arts have enabled Mormon communities to push back against imposed narratives and to articulate new visions of truth, belonging, and authority. So here, resistance refers to the creative refusal to accept limiting definitions of gender, belief, or worth. It can mean resistance against discrimination from outsiders, against subordination within institutional culture, or against incomprehension, the erasure of lived female or diverse experiences. And by reading Mormon art through this lens, we can see how every brushstroke, melody, performance is a negotiation of visibility and a struggle for space and identity and truth. So artworks, whether satirical cartoons, official church paintings, bold murals, or public performances, they shape and contest collective memory. They determine not just what stories are told, but whose voices are heard and whose bodies are visible and whose experiences are honoured or erased. In this presentation, I'll explore art as resistance in LDS history and how creativity has been used to challenge power, to affirm identity, and to open the door to new, inclusive visions of faith. So, while my presentation generally will focus on members of the LDS community using artwork as resistance, art in the context of Mormonism really begins with that from outside of the LDS community. So in the late 19th century, the LDS faith's emergence as a peculiar people in America was shaped not only by the rhetoric and politics, but also by cartoons and prints in broadsides. And these caricatures, often published in mainstream periodicals, portrayed Mormon women as animalistic, oppressed, or childlike, reinforcing those broader American anxieties about polygamy and gender deviance. So you can see in these caricatures here how the women, for example, they have their labels around their necks, almost as if they are being taken off to a cattle market, to be sold. And there are so many more examples of things like this that are quite radical in their depiction of Mormons in that early sort of pioneer stage. But the visual power, of these satirical works has contributed to the delegitimization of the Restoration and the reinforcement of the American fears around polygamy and female oppression and Mormon otherness. These early images constituted the first wave of visual discrimination against the faith, portraying saints, and especially women, as fanatical or oppressed. And in reaction, Mormon art became a means of resisting that incomprehension and reclaiming the identity. I'd be curious to hear if anyone has thoughts on how you think these sorts of images shaped the public opinion about the LDS community. If anyone has any thoughts.
It's always been used, as a propaganda. Art is, what they say is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And so I think wherever you see that there's, the Nazi the way they wanted the public to see the Jews was done mainly through, caricature artwork like this. And I think that it's the way things are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of artwork being used as propaganda or as rhetoric is, a theme that really shines through. So I'd argue that then, to an extent, the somewhat extremity of the art that was produced by outsiders helped to spark the strength of the use of artwork in the LDS faith to portray both an internal and external, to portray to both an internal and external audience what is or is not Mormon. Under siege, the church countered these narratives with its own visual productions. Early LDS art emphasized domestic tranquility and female virtue and sacrifice. Emma Smith, here in this painting on the left, is depicted as a sort of nursing caregiver, for instance. And the painting on the right, it's quite clear that this woman is subject to her husband, looking almost in fear, I'd say, waiting for his sort of command. And the artwork focuses so much on the domestic worth of women, and as a result, it prioritizes the value of the wife and mother roles. And later I'll come back to this, and how the modern movement of artwork that values LDS women beyond this has sort of moved past those ideals. There are some exceptions. So this painting is about saving the Book of Commandments, which obviously celebrates female heroism. This primary activity on the right, it solves to spell the word courage. And it's one of very few examples in the church's sort of approved artworks where women are celebrated for something that is not being a woman or a nurturer or a wife. Another particular exception to this is this painting here, Come Let Us Rejoice, the foundation of the Relief Society. This painting appears to celebrate the collective power of women and the Relief Society's role as a forum for the female voice in the religion, yet Rain's retrospective painting of the society's formation captures the enduring and patronising dominance of men over women, even at a women's organisation, through the lingering presence of Joseph Smith, who appears to lead the meeting by lecturing to the women, there on the left. And the focal point of the painting is not the women, but the women's universal attention to Joseph Smith, who has his back to the viewer. What's most interesting to me is that the church's chosen URL and download name for the painting is Joseph Speaking to Women, which is completely different to the actual title of the painting given by the artist. And I think this suggests a bit of a shift in focus towards an androcentric perspective and seemingly diverting from the intended emphasis on women, a reflection of the church as a patriarchal organisation, really. These images provided a counter-myth, one designed to assert doctrinal legitimacy and reinforce new gender norms, and win broader American favour. The church as an institution is therefore seen to be using visual art in a sense as a form of resistance against the harshness of the outlook that outsiders' art produced in the first instance. The church's celebration of domestic womanhood can be read as resistance to persecution, but it also marks the beginning of internal subordination, where women are defined as virtuous only through domesticity. After reclaiming narrative control through official art, the LDS Church has also used classic artworks to visually assert its distinct values and theology, sometimes in very direct ways. A vivid example of this is the Church's alteration of renowned Christian artwork to reinforce its standards of modesty and doctrinal correctness. And one well-known case is Karl Bloch's The Resurrection of Christ. If people would like to point out the differences between the two for me.
They've got little cap sleeves on, haven't they? Yeah, the garments have changed now, they can get rid of them.
There's no wings as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
no wings. Yeah,
So it's very much the blonde,
yes.
white.
Yeah, the hair of the angels and Jesus and the skin of Jesus are definitely
The
lighter.
floor is perfect.
Yes,
That's really interesting, isn't it?
yeah.
Jesus showed a little bit of ankle though.
He's less modest. isn't
Less
he?
modest,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I find really interesting in the church's painting, which is on the right for any that hadn't figured it out.
Thank you.
Jesus seems to be less modest, which, I mean, I've got different opinions on, I think, partly why his ankles are being shown or his feet being shown more is to emphasise the marks by the nails. And you can see on the marks in his hands are more distinct as well. But, you know, if you wanted to be cynical about it, you could say, well, they want to prove a point that the man can be as uncovered as he wants, that the women are more covered up. So originally Bloch painted two angels at Christ's tomb with visible shoulders and as well under their arms, and with dramatic wings, which reflects common Christian iconography. But when the LDS Church published the painting for official use, they removed the angels' wings to align with LDS beliefs that angels do not have wings. And more notably, they covered the angels' bare shoulders and upper arms to adhere to church standards for female modesty.
Keep the angels as women, though.
Yeah,
Which could be seen theologically as a surprise.
yeah. I've always found LDS beliefs around angels particularly difficult to get my head around.
But there is very much a connection between angels and women's roles.
Yeah.
Women, like Sisters of Zion song.
Yes.
things like that,
Yeah. This is another example. This is a painting by Carlo Maratta, a painting of the Virgin Mary. Again, you see her chest is covered, her neckline has been raised, which sort of substitutes that original Baroque sensibility for a version reflecting LDS modesty codes. The cherubs have been removed as well. And while these edits assert the distinctiveness of the LDS doctrines, setting Mormonism apart from other branches of Christianity, they also reveal ongoing anxieties around the visual representation of women's bodies. These altered classics become not just illustrations, but powerful statements about what and who the church considers sacred, you know, whose image can be altered and whose image can't, and what they consider to be superior or worthy of emulation. And these edits, they resist the perceived corruption of worldly art, but in doing so, they reproduce subordination, controlling women's representation, even in sacred narratives. After seeing the institution's tight control over official art and female modesty, it's striking in some ways to see the work of Minerva Teichert, who was a pioneering LDS artist whose murals quietly subvert those same boundaries. Her art stands out for its bold and narrative style and for centering women as critical actors in LDS history. She trained in New York and Chicago and brought modernist sensibility and personal conviction to Mormon mural painting during the early to mid 20th century. So unlike the church's tendency to place women on the sidelines or in strictly nurturing roles, Teichert's murals and canvases often place women at the centre of the action, crossing the prairies, presiding in households and communing with the divine. Her depictions emphasise women's courage, agency and contribution to the unfolding Mormon narrative. So on the left here, the Madonna of 1847. It shows female pioneers as strong and resilient and spiritually equal partners in that westward migration. And again, on the right, the woman is at the centre of this painting. She is the focus, and she stands with conviction. She looks like she is in charge. She is commanding, which is refreshing to see, I think.
Imogen, could I ask, what is she holding?
I'm not sure.
Could it be a sword?
Do you not think it's reminiscent of the Statue of Liberty, though?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know what she's holding. I don't think I've cut it off. I think that is the full painting. So who knows? Maybe it is a sword. Yeah, but Teichert's perspective reflects not just her faith, but also her family's strong feminist influence. Her mother supported women's rights, and Minerva herself was described as 100 years before her time when it came to women's liberation. And while her work didn't openly defy church policy, its focus on women's stories and spiritual independence offers a distinctly alternative vision within the LDS canon. She also had a Book of Mormon series, where again she's painting scriptural women reaching out to Christ, participating actively in revelation and forging their own connections to the divine. Again, when there's such an absence of women in the church's art books, it's refreshing to see women just represented here.
May I ask which are the people in the Book of Mormon? Because there aren't a lot of women, obviously, in the Book of Mormon, so which are the people that she's kind of represented in her paintings?
A lot of the paintings are more about like bystanders. So instead of all of the bystanders just being men, she'll put them as women. Because you're right, there aren't that many female characters in the Book of Mormon, like main characters. So a lot of the time she's just putting those background characters into the focus, because they don't get attention in the main narrative. She also, that's frustrating. She did a mural for which was put in the Manti Temple in Utah. It was recently taken out for conservation, and there was a lot of uproar about it, mostly by women, because they felt like it was so important for them to have artwork in there that they felt represented them in such a sacred space. And really, it's the only example I've come across of a mural painted by a woman in a temple. I'm sorry that the image isn't loading for whatever reason. But yeah, in today's context, Teichert's murals look remarkably progressive in their affirmation of women's dignity and leadership within scriptural and historical settings, and she reminds us that the boundaries of official art are never as firm as they seem, and that even within constrained environments, artists can find ways to elevate and celebrate those who are often left in the margins. Her murals resist cultural silence, turning devotional imagery into a quiet revolt against invisibility. So the next example of art as resistant comes not from individual LDS artists, but from the institutional church itself, through its hosting of the Believe in Him exhibition at the Hyde Park Chapel Visitors Centre in London. From February to April in 2024, the travelling show by Tom and Gail Holdman and the Roots of Humanity Foundation brought a 30-foot-long stained glass installation to the heart of South Kensington, just across from Victoria and Albert Museum, in one of London's most established Christian and artistic districts. So on the surface, this luminous display of the life and miracles of Christ fits seamlessly within the traditional Christian iconography, and yet that very choice, the use of stained glass, one of the most historically Catholic and Anglican art forms, is itself a quiet act of resistance against the otherness projected onto Mormonism. For generations, the LDS Church in Britain has been perceived as a religious outsider, modern, American, and disconnected from the visual and liturgical traditions of mainstream Christianity. So by choosing stained glass, a medium rooted in centuries of British religious architecture, the church asserts itself as belonging within that same sacred lineage. The glass's interplay of light and story visually declares that they too are part of the Christian artistic continuum and bearers of the same divine story. The exhibit also became a powerful symbol of interfaith diplomacy and inclusion during its London run. It was attended by ambassadors, diplomats, and government ministers from various and leaders from various faith traditions. And the very presence of such guests in a Mormon space, marvelling together at a familiar gospel scenes, rendered in a historically Christian medium, subtly challenged those boundaries that often separate Mormonism from the wider Christian world. In aesthetic terms, Believe in Hymn's Window's mastery of colour and composition does more than inspire devotion, in my opinion. It carries a message of spiritual reconciliation through art. Each panel is glowing with the depictions of disciples and ordinary women and men, suggesting this expansive and inclusive vision of the sacred. The participation of women, female artists and fabricators, such as the BYU student Lily Gaskin, underscores the theme. Women are not just viewers of divinity, but co-creators of it, shaping the glass, soldering fragments of illumination into wholeness. Through the use of light, craft, and collaboration, Believe in Him becomes both missionary and metaphor. It resists exclusion through visibility, asserting through artistry that Mormonism belongs to this shared Christian aesthetic tradition, and at the same time it gestures towards the communal nature of divine creation. In this way, the art does what many of the best examples in the Latter-day Saint canon have done. It transforms visual beauty into a statement of presence, belonging, and theology. Staying in Britain, I'd like to shift focus to the experience of British Latter-day Saint women and how they used music as artistic expression, not only as a demonstration of faith, but as a means of empowerment and subtle resistance. The 1961 British Singing Mothers Tour stands out as a remarkable but often overlooked moment in the history of Latter-day Saint women. Nearly 200 British Relief Society women, joined by a small contingent of Americans, formed a massive amateur choir. They toured the British Isles and performed at concert venues, including London's Royal Albert Hall, on the right there, in front of Church President David O. McKay, and it had very widespread press coverage. But this was more than a PR exercise. It was a kind of a spiritual and social intervention. A lot of these women had very little formal musical training, but they were asked to step up into incredibly public and professionalised roles. Their participation demanded sacrifice, not just from themselves, but from their families, as they reorganised their domestic routines and travelled long distances for rehearsals and performances, and shouldered those financial and logistical burdens. On the surface, the Singing Mothers programme reinforced familiar ideals of song and service and family, but in practice, for many women, joining the tour became an opportunity to break out of the private local sphere and step onto a national stage. A lot of participants described it as though the sisters had been transformed from ordinary wives and mothers and given the voices of angels. So giving them another lens to view their worth within the church. The choir conferred upon its members a visibility and authority rarely granted to LDS women, especially outside of Utah. And press estimates suggested that the tour generated more positive comment than the Tabernacle Choir's previous visit, which is a nice kick in the teeth, I think, for them. But importantly, this is not just a reflection of sort of existing church structures, but a British reinterpretation. The tour required deep organisational cooperation, challenging rigid gender boundaries by highlighting both women's agencies and men's supportive roles at home. Many participants and observers came to see the event not as a twee sort of auxiliary programme, but as the epitome of LDS possibility, female LDS possibility. Thus, while the lyrics being sung were chosen by church leadership and the very act of performing and taking the stage, travelling across the country, became a powerful vehicle for both spiritual self-realization and the quiet subversion of the prescribed domesticity. A lot of the time, these women, as they were touring, the men would look after the children at home. They would take over household responsibilities. So women got to experience that reversal of that gender role that is so deeply enforced. These performances were an act of resistance to confinement and challenging the ideology that holiness must be private or domestic, particularly for women. I'm going to try and fix this because this is kind of really important to understanding this. There we go. Magic. Until recently, Heavenly Mother has existed largely as a sacred absence in LDS visual culture. It's acknowledged in teaching, but it's rarely depicted, rarely gone into any detail. And in the last decade, though, there's been a flourishing of independent LDS artists, I think particularly with there being online platforms for people to share their art. Women have been able to bring Heavenly Mother into view in more strikingly diverse and imaginative ways. These artworks are unconstrained by institutional oversight and have reshaped the boundaries of the divine feminine and become a quiet form of resistance, reclaiming women's space in theology through art. So many of the contemporary portrayals are picturing Heavenly Mother as a parent, embracing maternal and domestic imagery. In these three images here, Heavenly Mother is appearing as a loving mother, nurturing infants or guiding children alongside, in the two on the right there, alongside a Heavenly Father. On the left, this is the earliest known depiction of Heavenly Mother, from 1908. Between then and sort of the early 2000s, there isn't any other depictions of Heavenly Mother that I've been able to find. There's no official images by the church. None of their pages, books, informational sections feature any imagery of Heavenly Mother. Which, when you think about the quite clear imagery that there is of Jesus and of Heavenly Father as material beings in the LDS tradition, it's quite striking that she is completely absent in that way. But while these images elevate femininity and motherhood, they also reflect the tension between empowerment and expectation. Heavenly Mother's virtue is often tied to caregiving, mirroring those long-standing cultural ideas that a woman's holiness emerges from her nurturing role. These works empower women by sacralizing their daily lives, but they can also risk narrowing divinity to a heteronormative and domestic ideal. But other artwork starts to veer away from that idea. So a new wave of artists have deliberately pushed beyond the aesthetic modesty that defines official church imagery. These two paintings here, they portray Heavenly Mother breastfeeding a child. Rather than framing this as a modesty, these artists are reclaiming the sacredness of the body itself and the beauty and power of women's physical form as an expression of divine creation. Heather Rutten's depictions on the left here of a fuller and curvier Heavenly Mother continue this theme, celebrating bodily diversity in ways that are entirely absent, really, from institutional art in the church. And these artists challenge the constraints of purity culture by reimagining female embodiment not as vulnerability or temptation, but as a wholeness and generative strength, the body as a holy space. You often get told in the church that your body is a temple, and that means you should cover it, be modest with it. These women are taking that sort of framework and saying, well, if my body's a temple, then it should be used for power. There are also works that put Heavenly Mother as a cosmic creator and as a multicultural deity as well. So this work on the left, Heavenly Mother is taking the form of a Pueblo woman from the Native American tradition, and placing her as Heavenly Mother. And the depiction here of a non-white deity explicitly disrupts that racialized whiteness that dominates LDS sacred art, envisioning a divine mother who belongs to all nations and cultures. Because ultimately, if there's no official imagery on Heavenly Mother, who's to say what she looks like? You can make the argument, in the LDS Church at least, that we know that God is white. We know that he is a man. We know that he, has long white hair, because he has appeared visually to people. But you can't say the same thing of Heavenly Mother, which allows us to push the boundaries in who she can be. And so the movement towards these cosmic and sort of multicultural images reframes the divine gender binary. Heavenly Mother becomes not only a nurturer but a world builder. She is placed also in the creation story. She helped to create reality, not just Heavenly Father. And those representations align with that idea that art is imaginative theology. It expands the space of the sacred through depiction rather than doctrine. I'm curious to ask people in the room how you would choose to visually represent Heavenly Mother if you were given the opportunity.
Some of the artists have actually shown Heavenly Mother as a black woman and very much kind of gone for mitochondrial Eve and North Africa ancestry. So they're, I think Mormons have always had a strong instinct to try, or in the past at their better moments, to try and match science with religion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most interesting things about the Restoration is it's happening at the time of the Enlightenment, where you have to have proof and evidence of things and it has to make sense rationally. And that instinct has been there in a lot of Mormon thoughts. So I find those artworks really interesting. The idea of if this is some kind of a mythos or story or account of something that really, really happened, and we've got this evidence of a lot of what really happened with the evolution of human beings, then that really excites me.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because for me, I wonder where all the other Heavenly Mothers are.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for me knowing, as someone brought up in the church, understanding the idea about our views on eternal marriages and life. And I personally would love to think it was just a single Heavenly Mother, but really doctrinally the conclusion is that that's not the case. So it's hard for me to see this as one. It's okay, that's Heavenly Mother, because I generally just think, well, where are the other mothers?
Mm-hmm.
Where are all these others that were obviously part of it? If we're thinking about the doctrine and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the fact that people have been able to produce so many different versions. Your point is really interesting about how everyone is ultimately saying there is one. But the fact that there's such a variety of what that one looks like, I think, again, is really powerful.
So I view Heavenly Mother as a job title, not as a gender-based thing. Just like I had a child when I was young, when I was a male presenter, I was still a mother at that point. And even though my womanhood had not yet been determined fully by me, even though it was already there. And in much the same way, I see Heavenly Mother as a job title, and I see more as a non-binary character within the grand story, that she holds all of the elements of godhood. So therefore, she is not she, and she is not he. She is they.
Yeah, and there are lots of examples. I've not chosen to put them up here, but there are lots of examples that depict Heavenly Mother as not a being at all, depicting her as simply a cosmic sort of matter. But you're right, it's almost as though we should say heavenly creator or heavenly caregiver or heavenly, whatever title we want to attribute. Because, is the gender the main story here, or is it the role in the creation?
I think Community of Christ, that's not part of our theology at all. But when you asked the question, I thought of my own mother, who was powerful, who was a really good Protestant culturally. She would protest anyone counting on her dignity. She accepted equality, no problem, but nobody was superior to her. And I asked my son once, we're going up to Graceland, what do you think of Grandma Bolton? And he said, she's all right. And I said, but she's a bit fierce, isn't she? And he said, but she's formed. So I think of my mother.
Yeah.
So this is really good stuff.
Yeah. Yes?
I think in some ways the artist has permission to create, but once they've created, they no longer have permission to change it, in the sense that whoever looks at it will have their own impression. So therefore there's freedom in the creation, but there is not freedom in the reaction to the creation. And so consequently we've all looked at these pictures and seen something different as individuals. So I think that sometimes we've got to see beyond that sometimes and look at what was the artist trying to portray, but we can never reach that because we'll never be the artist.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think in part, art more so than doctrine is easier to do that with, and again is part of what makes it so important, so beautiful. Of course, people interpret doctrine differently and scripture differently, but particularly in the LDS Church, there is one way to interpret it, and the church make that known. Whereas art, you're right, the viewer can have whatever reaction they want to it and build their own theology and their own revelation around it, more so than scripture.
So I'm really intrigued by the fact that the Ten Commandments say no graven images. And so Protestants have taken that to heart, right? But I'm beginning to realize that but then artists are often prophetic in the sense of justice, calling our attention to injustice or the dehumanization of people. So there's this, and you're alerting us to a whole prophetic, in the Old Testament sense, of arguing for the marginalized.
Yeah. I've always struggled a little bit with iconography because, ultimately the Bible says you shouldn't make icons. Icons become idols. You shouldn't worship idols. And yet art is such an intrinsic part of Christian tradition. I love it. I think it's really important. But if you're a real stickler for rules in the Bible, along with lots of other things, it can become a sticking point, I think. Yeah. Going back to what Andrew said about imagining his mother, on the right here, this is by Amber Lee Weiss, and she's chosen her great-grandmother as the face of the divine, transforming sort of personal remembrance into sacred genealogy. It's interesting that you said that, and she's chosen the same. Again, I think it's a really powerful way for people to be able to identify with the divine through their own family and ancestors. But yeah, I wanted to just focus a bit on the process of creativity, because what unites these artists beyond their stylistic diversity is that they are creating outside of ecclesiastical approval. They're not preserving a fixed narrative, they're exploring personal revolution through materials and symbols. So on the left here, Laura Erickson, she's created Heavenly Mother with no face, but she's used everyday materials to make the halo. So screws, safety pins, and even dummies. And it sort of merges the sacred and the mundane, blurring that line between divinity and ordinary labour, between creation and daily life. In the middle then, this is by Rocio Vasquez Cisnero, and she made this in collaboration with her mother, who taught her how to sew. And the project was sort of about telling ancestral stories whilst doing textile art, and the idea that it's sort of grounding Heavenly Mother in heritage and matrilineal healing and storytelling, which is a big sort of tradition of her culture. So through those creations, Latter-day Saint women are expressing and resolving their own tensions with what womanhood is and what is acceptable about it. And they find God not in the perfection or distance, but in material, memory and making, and the sacred existing in the act of creation itself. So contemporary Heavenly Mother art is both devotional and defiant. It's theology in progress, crafted, felt and reimagined through paint, textile and digital media. By embracing body, culture, ancestry and process, these artists construct a more inclusive divine image that honours women's lived realities while expanding the imagined possibilities of God. And these contemporary artists are resisting doctrinal silence and gender incomprehension, using creation as reclamation. Oops. So, to sum up, we've seen throughout the journey that art within Mormonism is not passive decoration. It's a battleground of belief and identity and power. It's one of the most enduring ways that Latter-day Saint women and artists in general have engaged in resistance against discrimination from the outside, against subordination within, and against incomprehension and silence around their lived experiences of faith. In Latter-day Saint history, art has functioned as more than ornamentation. It's been a visual language of faith and defiance. From caricatures used to ridicule, demonize, and condemn, to official paintings that tamed and defined, each image forms part of an ongoing negotiation over who gets to speak for Mormonism and who gets to be seen. Sometimes this visual tradition has affirmed traditionalist tropes of motherhood and subordination, reinforcing that narrow picture of women as modest domestic caretakers. But that too is a kind of resistance, but one turned inward, protecting orthodoxy through containment. Yet in the movements we've explored, from Minerva Teichert's murals to the Believe in Him stained glass exhibition, and the voices of British singing mothers to daring depictions of Heavenly Mother, we witness another more expansive form of resistance emerge, one that challenges silence with creation, hierarchy with imagination, and invisibility with light. The Believe in Him exhibition in London's Hyde Park Chapel stands as an institutional act of resistance against otherness, using stained glass as a traditional Christian medium to assert belonging in a faith lineage that once cast Mormons as outsiders. Similarly, Teichert's brushstrokes and the harmonies of the British choir and the visionary labour of contemporary women and female artists all reclaim spiritual authority through aesthetic participation, each example illuminating how faith can resist marginalisation not through rejection but through recreation. These acts of artistic expression are not minor footnotes, they are acts of gentle protest, radical reclamation, and quiet theology. Each brushstroke and melody carries defiance, insisting that divine truth must also include the feminine, the embodied, and the diverse. In contemporary depictions of Heavenly Mother, we see this resistance come into full colour. These artists reject silence as doctrine, defy modesty codes and racial stereotypes, and reclaim the sacred as plural and embodied. To create art here is to create theology. To depict is to declare. Through their work, the divine becomes relational, plural, and profoundly human. So when we ask what it means for truth to prevail, we must also ask whose truth prevails, and whose truths still wait to be heard. The art of resistance shows that truth is not static. It is refracted through perspective, emotion, and experience. It's continuously re-illuminated, like light through glass, by those who dare to see differently. Ultimately, these women and artists show us that art within Mormonism can be both doctrine and dissent, harmony and protest, resistance and revelation. Their work opens a space where new generations of women might see themselves not only in the pews or in service, but in the sacred frame itself. And that perhaps is the quiet utopia that our theme points to. A faith made broader, kinder, and more complete because women dared to resist erasure, to imagine anew, and to make themselves visible in both pigment and praise. Thank you. I'd love to take questions and things. Not that I can promise that I'll be able to answer them.
So I have a comment.
Yeah.
So about the women, the British mothers singing. So, and the dig at the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, I think, is influenced by the Welsh choral singing tradition. So it's an import from the Welsh, who are resisting the English and are being non-conformists. So Welsh choirs are a form of communal solidarity and resistance. So the women's choir is a logical continuation of which I think is delicious.
Yes.
And the other thing is the Dialogue Journal of Mormon Thought should have this as an article.
Thank you. No, I that's a really interesting point to make about.
This is a Sunstone article. How dare you?
Dialogue.
No, that's a really interesting point to make about Welsh choirs. I'd not made that connection before, but you're right. That sort of importation of culture. Yeah.
I was speaking to a female professor I know from BYU
Mm-hmm.
this year, and it brought to mind actually that there is often that space for exploration personally, but that the church will put its foot down in certain ways. And I know that there have been pressures on academics who teach about Heavenly Mother at BYU, and I know that that's been historically the case as well. Like, I know that there's people that have been fired for teaching about Heavenly Mother, and I know that there are redundancies and people leaving because they were they were talking on this in their spaces as teachers at BYU.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tension amongst the academics that teach there when it comes to this. So it was interesting to me to see that it's almost like it's a space you can have as long as you're not too open about it, maybe, or as long as you're not in a place where it could influence others, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's definitely still that foot coming down.
Yeah.
That's enough, no more speculation or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is why it's only really come to light in the past 10, 20 years. This artwork on Heavenly Mother and more discussion around it is because there are just more independent spaces for sharing that. You're not limited to having your artwork put in a gallery or in a book. And, once one person has put something online, another person sees it and thinks, oh, I can do that, and it cascades down. I think it's something that the church is going to struggle in the future to keep a lid on, because they don't really have many answers to firm truths on it.
Can I argue on behalf of the church?
Of course you can.
If you don't mind. I think The thing with art is it's different. Each person is entitled to his own interpretation and his own creation of art. But the thing is that what you get then is profusion of work and thought. Now, if you're talking about a huge organisation, there has to be some kind of order in that thought. Somewhere among all of this, there needs to be a path. And I think sometimes what happens is that the brethren decide the path, right or wrong, but they decide a path which is clear for everyone to follow, rather than being sort of dragged all over the place, you know, from the sheer volume of diversity of thought.
Yes. No, I agree with you, and the church certainly does that. What I would like to see is the church decide a direction on Heavenly Mother and find a piece of artwork or a few that they would be willing to put in the image there. Yeah.
They do have a direction. That direction is, we don't know, we want you to stop asking. Thank you very much. Theology Reverend said as much at a conference. Don't pray to her. Yeah, it was a conference before. He said, don't pray to her.
Yeah.
We know as much as you do. We've put the essay out. That's it. Stop it.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those issues. I can't think of many other things in the church where they will talk about it. The current president of the church will say at a fireside in Belgium, maybe a couple of months ago now, we are children of heavenly parents, heavenly mother, or mothers. I was like, oh, okay, right, so he's saying it. He's saying what we know, that there's a polygamous nature to heavenly mother, or there's multitudes of them. Can I have some clarity on that? No. Do you speak for Jesus? Yes. Can you ask him? No. And so we are in this tension where they say we don't want to ask the questions, or we're not getting the answers, but they're not being clear about whether they are asking and they're not getting the answers, or they just don't want to ask.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of clarity that would be helpful for people.
Yeah, because then people are left to make their own answers and their own clarity.
And in a church of personal revelation, people are going to find their own answers.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Can I just ask about the space that we're talking about, where the resistance is actually taking place? Because what we have is the space of the church, the architecture of it, highly controlled, placed into communities with no relationship to the landscape, literally Lego type buildings. And then we've got the space where this art is resisting. And I wanted to understand how many women are actually going to see this sort of resistance in the actual place in which they worship, which is really, I mean, we can put things online, but they are not they don't have the function of worship. So I wanted to know what you feel about the space and owning the space.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of this is deeply personal for people, and I think it is true that you are more likely to get people who are already sort of on the edge and willing to push the boundaries, who are going to find these sorts of depictions, because it's something they're already searching for. You know, like we've discussed, it's not going to be in a church, in a chapel, because it's not allowed. And yeah, I would say that generally speaking, younger people as well are more likely to come across this sort of thing because they're active on social media, and that's where these things get shared around.
But how does that translate, therefore, into the art of the resistance?
Yeah. So, but then I think beyond that, as new generations are growing up and being influenced by this artwork, whether it's just a few people or more than that, I believe at least that cascades down, that it infuses then into a broader church culture, and whether that's actually on the surface or underneath being hidden because it's not really allowed to come out, I think still it's powerful for women who are maybe not resisting the actual church, because I mean, let's face it, you can't really. We've discovered that it's quite impossible to do that without getting backfire. But they're resisting, the space of resistance I think is more personal. They're resisting their personal views on who they're allowed to be. They're resisting their own understanding of what the church is teaching them and what is possible for them. So I think, yeah, that resistance space, it comes more personally, on more of a private level. Yeah.
I think the whole Heavenly Mother thing is essentially an example of resistance. The whole reason why it seems to have lasted is because someone wrote a song about it.
Yeah.
And then it was such a popular song that, I don't know, the brethren wanted to get rid of it, but you just can't. Once you've got a piece of art that's loved, and I think the whole Heavenly Mother doctrine is an example of like a resistance within the mass movements of the church. And no, we love that song. No way you're getting rid of it out of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. At the back there.
So, to go back to your question, a couple of years or so ago, I was assigned to do the Relief Society newsletter, and I think it was the last issue that I was assigned to do. It was on the topic of Heavenly Mother, and of course I included all these links. Here's a dialogue article full of artwork about Heavenly Mother, and here is the children's book, the girls' book of Heavenly Mother, and the boys' book of Heavenly Mother, and here's all these links and different articles and different things that people had said. So that was the issue I put out for Mother's Day, basically. But, yeah.
And how was it?
I didn't get any complaints.
Good.
This is our last question. We've got time for one more.
Okay.
Well, I've had plenty.
So you talked a little bit about the reclamation of the church swinging more towards mainstream Christianity and depictions of artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that will become more mainstream in church imagery within chapels? And if so, will that have a more mainstream view, although some of the topics that we've discussed today potentially swing into the church over the next 20 to 30 years? Sorry.
It's, it's impossible to tell. But, I mean, my general impression is that, well, it's really hard as well now that there's a new president of the church. I mean, under Nelson, I think it was definitely swinging quite strongly in the way of becoming more mainstream. Who knows what will happen now? But I think, I don't know. I think it depends a lot on geography as well. I think in places like Utah, it's like, well, that kind of is the mainstream, right? But like here in the UK, in other European countries, all around the world, we've seen, like, for example, the Birmingham Temple, they've very definitely done that to look more like a traditional Christian place of worship. So yeah, I think it depends somewhat on geography whether you're going to find in LDS churches that whether it's swinging more mainstream or if it's swinging more independent. But yeah, I mean, it's for the prophet to decide.